Chapter 2. After another 2 hours of driving, the hills around us began to rise. There were trees everywhere now, crowding in and hovering over the road. Every 10 minutes or so, we were passing signs reminding us that we were approaching the red zone. There are 3 zones, green, yellow, and red. Green simply meant that everything was normal and that using electricity was safe to do. The yellow zone was still technically safe as to electricity, but it meant that the red zone was near. The red zone was where electricity became dangerous. It marked the beginning of the massive electric field that covered 2/3 of the continent. In the West, scientists called it a natural yet unexplainable phenomenon. Any electric spark attracted enormous amounts of energy, causing potential explosions, or at the very least, minor burns. The biggest danger was for massive machines, such as airplanes or cars, but even a digital watch could result in serious scars. In the East, where scientists were scarce, people simply called it Tinder Sky Country, a place where the sky sparked, and that was all there was to it. My stomach growled. Folding my arms, I merely looked out the window. "If you're hungry," Timothy began to say. "I'm not hungry." He looked at me incredulously. "And then what was that noise just now?" "You thought that was me? That was you." "Lisbette, I know it was you." "Well, it wasn't." I watched him set his jaw again. I didn't care. I was still too annoyed with him for being such a grouch about taking me with him to Easton. My stomach growled again, but I still refused to admit that I was hungry, so I raised my eyebrows and looked at his stomach significantly. He only breathed harder through his nose. I watched as we drove deeper and higher into the hills and rubbed my ears. They had started bothering me sometime in the last half hour, and I wondered if I was developing allergies. There was a sudden pop in my eardrum. I gasped. "Something's wrong with my ears." He hesitated, as if deciding whether to break his most recent vow of silence. After a moment, he said shortly, "It's the elevation." "What?" Unwillingly, he continued, "When you go up a mountain fast, your body has a hard time adjusting to the change of elevation." He paused and then added, "It'll pass." "Oh," I said, cautiously tugging on my ears. "It is a very uncomfortable thing, this sensation that one's brain is swelling." The car was speeding up a winding, narrow road with its nose in the air like a ship riding a wave. Only we never came down. Up and up we drove, sometimes leveling but never dropping. We were in the St. Weldons now, a massive mountain range that separated Western civilization from the eastern provinces. From my window at Brindalock, my home in Easton, I had watched the sun set behind them all my life, but this was the first time that I had actually been in the mountains themselves. From home they had appeared blue, but as I looked up at the towering peaks beside us, the only color I saw was green. The pine trees were packed together like sardines, so tight that they completely hid the mountains. I laid my head on the back of my seat and tried to calculate the number of trees we were passing each second. Finally I gave up, closed my eyes, and went to sleep. I jerked awake. It was dark outside the car except for bright, glaring lights stationed on each side of the road. "What time is it?" 3:30. "In the morning?" Timothy smirked. "In the afternoon." "But why is it so dark?" "Oh, we're in a tunnel." I gazed ahead at the blackness beyond Timothy's headlights. There was no end in sight. I turned and looked behind us and saw nothing but blackness. A long tunnel. "This is the entrance to the last checkpoint," he explained. "I must have been asleep a long time because Timothy seemed to have forgotten how annoyed he was with me." He continued, "It goes 3 miles into the mountain and ends in an underground parking lot. After that, we'll be there." "How many times have you taken the pass before?" "Twice." "Does your father approve?" "It was his idea." I thought about that for a moment. I knew Sir John Robert was wealthy, but anyone familiar with him at all would know that he was not the kind of man who would risk his son's neck all in the name of the family business. In fact, Sir John Robert was notorious for making sure others were safe. 5 years ago, during one of the harshest winters ever recorded in our village, he and his foreman were seen going from house to house, riding through 3 feet of snow, checking on all his tenants to make sure everyone's roofs were holding up against the weight of the snow. I asked, "What was so important that your father would want you to take the pass?" Timothy's face went blank. "It's a private matter." Concerned, I asked, "Is your company in trouble?" I may covet the Eastons' uncanny good luck, but I'd never want them to actually lose it. "Business is fine." I thought for another moment. "Oh, I get it. You're bored." Caught off guard, he repeated, "Bored?" "Men get bored, so they need to go out and do stupid things." "Really?" he asked in a huff. "That's what you think? That I—" But he stopped mid-sentence. In an altered voice, he said, "You're right. I was bored." Now I was annoyed. There he was looking smug over his little lie, and there was nothing I could do about it. And of course he was lying. I hadn't even meant what I'd said about men being bored and stupid. I'd only wanted to irritate him into telling the truth. Only by agreeing with me, he had adeptly squashed my little strategy. There was nothing I could say now, unless I admitted that I was bluffing. Like that was going to happen. With only the thin light of the dashboard, I studied his face for a moment. This was more the Timothy I remembered, relaxed, easygoing, and ever so slightly cocky. Only the last time I had taken a really good look at Timothy's face this close, he had only just begun to shave. Somehow, over the last several years, even if we were in the same room, which wasn't often, we were always in opposite corners. He was 24 now, and had been for 3 months. His jaw was more pronounced, but in a nice way, and his hair seemed darker. But he had lost his plump cheeks, and along with that, something of the innocence was gone as well. In its place was that adultish mark of gravity and independence. It frightened me a little. It had frightened me the moment I had seen him in his apartment this morning. I wanted the old safe Timothy that I had known as a child, but the old Timothy didn't exist anymore, and I wasn't sure if I liked this new one. This one didn't seem the kind to laugh at my jokes anymore. He must have sensed me staring because he took his eyes from the road long enough to look at me. "What's the matter?" "Why didn't you want me to come with you?" I asked. "I thought we were friends." Something about my question must have struck him the wrong way because a shadow of the scowl came back. "Yeah, you thought that? Well, you're the last kind of friend I needed today." We had arrived at the parking lot. It was a vast structure with room for 100 vehicles. Only as far as the eye could see, the place was empty, except for a handful of cars and a couple of big-engine trucks. As we got out of the car, there was a damp, stale smell, and I could hear water dripping somewhere nearby, echoing loudly. It was very dark because only a handful of the lamps had been lit. It was light enough, however, for me to see that the cement columns nearby were crumbling, and that the painted parking lines had faded from yellow to a light gray. I rubbed my arms and reached for my jacket. "Chilly, isn't it?" Timothy was unloading the bags from the back of the car. He took the shiny wooden box out last and tucked it safely under his arm. I couldn't help but smile again as I remembered my joke about the family silver. But maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe there really was something valuable in there. Family jewels belonging to his mother, secret documents, uncut diamonds, maybe money enough to cover the money I had lost yesterday. Too bad that box was in his hands and not mine. Timothy was about to try to pick up my bag as well as his own, but I swooped over and grabbed it at the last second. "I've got that, thanks." There was a low open hallway near the place we had parked. On a large board over the hallway were painted the words, "Welcome to the St. Weldon Port of Entry. Please proceed here." Below it was a long list of items that needed to be turned off or left behind for personal safety, too long to read. Besides, the only dangerous thing I had brought was my phone, and I had stashed that with Timothy's phone in the glove compartment of his car. This was my first time seeing an inland port of entry. Always before I'd traveled by route of sea. If the weather was good, it took 5 full days of travel by boat from Audleton to reach the port town of Michaelton, and then 3 more days of travel over land to reach my home in Easton Village. But everyone knew that it took only 5 days total to do the same trip through the St. Weldon Pass. However, nobody ever took the land route for the same reason I never went to certain parts of Audleton at night: the unsavory population. Inside the port of entry office, we were in a large open room with windows facing the east side of the St. Weldons. I saw from the pendulum clock on the wall that it was after 4. Oil lamps hanging from the ceiling had already been lit. The place was dusty and smelled like tobacco. 2 border employees sat at desks, while a third was fast asleep in his chair by the stove in the corner.